Today we're going to take a look at a few more aspects of civil law. Assumption of risk, one that we probably should have included on the notes yesterday, but I didn't get that far. We'll talk about today. An assumption of risk is essentially a defense in a lawsuit. You know, when we talked about yesterday that if somebody acts in one of those three ways are elements of a lawsuit, if they acted either intentionally, foreseeably, or negligently, and their actions led to somebody being injured or damaged, that they could be sued. And that is true. Sometimes, though, I apologize, excuse me. Sometimes, however, people knew that they could possibly be hurt by doing whatever activity they were doing. And if you're being sued, your defense might be, wait a minute, they knew that. They knew that they could get hurt here. There was an assumption of risk, and it is a defense. Okay, so assumption of risk works a number of different ways. Remember when we were going to go to the field trip to the penitentiary? Well, when we go to the penitentiary, they have our students sign a waiver form saying that they know that there is a potential risk of danger going into the penitentiary. So let's say that we went into the penitentiary and there was a riot and somebody was injured. And then you tried to sue saying, wait a minute, I was injured on this field trip. It's the penitentiary's fault. Their defense may be, hey, you signed that waiver form. You knew that there was a risk of injury by entering this, and you did it anyway. Now, that may protect them from a lawsuit. It doesn't always work that way. So let's say that you sign that waiver, and let's say that they're taking students through the penitentiary, and then it turns out it's their break time. The guards say, all right, we're going to take a break. You guys just wander around for the next 15 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and finish this tour. So they leave us inside the penitentiary, and somebody is injured by a inmate. They were negligent. That would be negligent to just allow people to be wandering around. And it doesn't make any difference if you signed a assumption of risk or not, or a waiver form or not. They would still be negligent in that case. So a waiver does not always protect somebody from being sued, but it does make it harder to successfully sue them because you're acknowledging that you knew that there was some danger there. We see assumption of risk in lots of things. If you go to a sporting event, there's an assumption of risk that maybe you could be injured even viewing a sporting event. We'll talk about that later when we look at some cases. If you play in a sporting event, there's an assumption of risk that you could be injured. So if you're a football player and you're playing for the school and you get tackled and you break your arm, you can't sue the school saying, wait, I was injured in an activity that you guys were allowing. You knew when you got into that game that you were playing that there was an assumption of risk, that there was a possibility that you could be injured. So there's a number of different activities or things that we may do that we understand that there is a potential risk that what we're doing. And that's what we refer to as assumption of risk. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is class action lawsuits. Class action lawsuits are when a group of people sue together. If a group of people have been harmed and they sue as one class or one group, and then they split the damages that they are awarded. Remember, you could be awarded actual damages or punitive damages or both. So let's say that we have, well, let's just use our class itself. Let's say that we are actually in class and the school buys a cleaner for the whiteboards. They buy it cheap, make it themselves possibly. Well, let's say that that cleaner ends up causing health issues to the students. The fumes from it harm the lungs. Well, maybe that class, literally that class, would together sue the school. And if they would win, let's say $100, then they would split that $100 equally. If they'd win $1,000,000, they would split it equally. Well, almost equally. We got to talk about the lawyers first, too, and I'll get to that in a second. Class action lawsuits are relatively common. You actually see them quite a bit. I've been watching a little bit of daytime TV now, and every now and then, when you're watching a daytime TV show, you may see a lawyer come on an advertisement saying, if you took this particular medication between this month and this month, or this year and this year, you may be eligible for a class action lawsuit. And so if you did take that medication and you were harmed by it, you could join a class action lawsuit. there's actually quite a few of these. Let me tell you one that I could have been a part of. I got this in the mail a few years ago. This was from a class action lawsuit against Wells Fargo, the bank. A few years ago, Wells Fargo was creating accounts in people's names without their permission. So let's say I have a checking account with Wells Fargo. If they would create a second checking account in my name or a savings account or whatever, that would be doing things with that they had no right to do. Now, it was being done because there was some incentives for their employees to get their customers to sign up for more accounts. Well, some of their employees were just signing customers up without permission. Well, when this came out, there was a class action lawsuit against Wells Fargo. And because I bank at Wells Fargo, I could have been part of it, but nobody made an account in my name, so I didn't fill this out and send it in because I was not harmed by that action. People were, but I wasn't one of the people that were harmed. But I also, if on the other side, the lawsuit was already done, but if you read this, this is how much I would have received, $9.50. It was a $1.5 million lawsuit. So Wells Fargo had to pay $1 or $1.5 million, but each person who was harmed would only receive $9.50. If you split it up among a huge amount, there's not a lot, sometimes there's not a lot left. Now, there also is lawyers that need to be paid in here. Now, lawyers sometimes work by the hour. And if you work by the hour, it might be $250 or $300 an hour. So let's say I go hire a lawyer to someone, I use the example, someone running into my mailbox the other day. Well, let's say it's a really nice mailbox. So I hire a lawyer to sue that individual. Well, that lawyer needs to get paid. And if they work on this case for 5 hours, then I have to pay them their wage, which could be, again, $250 an hour. It may not make sense for me to bring up a lawsuit here. Now, we'll talk about something called small claims court later on that deals with these little things. But there is something else, especially for bigger cases, and that's a contingency fee. Some lawyers will agree to work on a contingency fee, and in which case that you do not have to pay the lawyers any hourly wage. And if they win the lawsuit, they will take a percentage of the damages awarded to you, usually 30 to 40%. However, if they lose, you don't have to pay them anything. Excuse me, little hoarse voice. Now, this can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. If we go back to here, I'm guessing the lawyers in this case worked on a contingency fee. So that $1.5 million, the lawyers are going to take their 40% out first, which is then going to leave whatever is left to be divided up among the individuals. So let's say that in this particular case, let's say that I had $100,000 worth of damage. Let's say I was in a car accident, someone ran into me, I had medical bills, and $100,000 worth of medical bills. And I sued on a contingency fee. I hired a lawyer on a contingency fee, and I win $100,000 worth of damages. Now that's what I had. But the lawyer takes their $40,000 out first. That leaves me with $60,000, but I had $100,000 worth of bills to pay because of this. It's not a perfect system, but it is something that is sometimes offered by lawyers. Sometimes we hear of frivolous lawsuits, of these huge lawsuits that are brought up that seem ridiculous, and we'll look into those a little bit more here in a bit. Sometimes lawyers get a bad name. There's lots of jokes out there about lawyers, and I think lawyers, like every other profession, the vast majority of lawyers are good, honest people. But there's always some that are not, and those that are not sometimes give a bad name to the rest of the profession. And sometimes you hear like lawyers being referred to as ambulance chasers, where they're bringing up lawsuits just to get rich. Oftentimes on those kind of cases, they may be working on a contingency fee, and those things do happen. Just like in any other profession, we have dishonest people in them. I think lawyers get a bad name sometimes, but nonetheless. So we'll look at contingency fees a little bit more too, at least when we start looking at cases. All right, this is all we're going to do, at least for the note aspect for today.